What is the price of betrayal? For Sebastian Thorne, a man who had everything, it was a price he never thought he'd have to pay. On a sun-drenched afternoon, in a cathedral filled with New York's elite, he stood at the altar and made a choice. He shattered the heart of his sweet, unassuming fiancée, Lena, for a woman who promised him the world. He chose ambition. He chose power. But in the most spectacular twist of fate, Sebastian was about to learn he had just thrown away the keys to an empire beyond his wildest dreams. He didn't just leave a woman at the altar. He abandoned the real heiress. This is the story of how the quiet girl he discarded came back to claim her throne and exact the most devastating revenge imaginable. The light filtering through the stained glass windows of St. Patrick's Cathedral on Fifth Avenue was by all accounts angelic. It painted kaleidoscopic patterns on the marble floors and across the faces of New York's high society, a veritable who's who of finance, art, and old money. The air was thick with the scent of 1,000 white lilies and the low, expectant hum of a crowd waiting for a fairy tale to conclude. At the center of it all stood Lena Vance, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. In a simple yet breathtakingly elegant Vera Wang gown, she felt like an imposter. She was a librarian, an archivist from NYU, with a passion for dusty first editions and the quiet solitude of history. How had she ended up here, about to marry Sebastian Thorne, the city's most formidable real estate magnate? She looked at him, standing all and impossibly handsome in his Tom Ford tuxedo. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his jawline sharp enough to cut glass, and his eyes, those piercing blue eyes, held a universe of ambition. For 2 years, he had been her world. He'd found her charming, a refreshing escape from the piranha-infested waters he swam in daily. He loved her quiet intelligence, her kindness, the way she wasn't impressed by his billions, but by the stories he told of his childhood. Or so she thought. The organ music swelled a majestic piece by Bach that seemed to shake the very foundations of the cathedral. This was it. The officiant, a bishop whose attendance was a testament to Sebastian's influence, smiled benevolently. "Do you, Sebastian Alexander Thorne," the bishop began, his voice echoing in the cavernous space, "take this woman, Lena Vance, to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part." A beat of silence. Then another. The expectant hum of the crowd faltered, replaced by a tense, electric stillness. Lena's smile trembled at the edges. She saw a flicker of something in Sebastian's eyes. Not love, not nervousness, but a cold, hard calculation. He cleared his throat. He turned his gaze from the bishop to her, and the warmth she had come to cherish was gone, replaced by an Arctic frost. "I can't," he said. The 2 words were quiet, yet they detonated in the silence like a bomb. A collective gasp rippled through the pews. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Lena felt the blood drain from her face. Her bouquet of peonies and lily-of-the-valley suddenly felt impossibly heavy. "Sebastian, what are you saying?" She whispered, her voice a fragile thread. He wouldn't meet her eyes fully. He stared at a point just past her shoulder. "I'm sorry, Lena. I truly am. But I can't do this." He took a half-step back, a physical severing of their connection. This was a mistake. Suddenly a figure emerged from the front pew. Isabella Rossi, in a blood-red dress that was a scandal in itself, glided towards the altar. Isabella was Sebastian's head of public relations, a woman as sharp and polished as a shard of obsidian. She was everything Lena wasn't: aggressive, overtly sensual, and dripping with the kind of ambition that left bodies in its wake. She placed a perfectly manicured hand on Sebastian's arm. "It's all right, Sebastian," Isabella murmured, her voice carrying just enough for those nearby to hear. "You're making the right choice, the strong choice." The puzzle pieces slammed into place in Lena's mind, each one a fresh wave of agony. The late nights at the office, the whispered phone calls, the scent of a strange, expensive perfume on his jacket. It wasn't work. It was her. Sebastian looked from Isabella's triumphant smirk back to Lena's shattered face. "Isabella, she understands my world, what it takes. She offers a future, a partnership that can build an empire. You offer comfort, Lena, and comfort doesn't close deals on skyscrapers." And the cruelty of his words was breathtaking. He was reducing their love, their life together, into a business liability. He was liquidating her right here in front of the world. The flashes of cameras began a predatory storm of light as the press, smelling blood, abandoned all pretense of decorum. Lena stood frozen, the world tilting on its axis. She felt hundreds of pairs of eyes on her, some pitiful, some scornful, all judging. She could feel the headline already forming as "Tycoon Dumps Librarian at Altar for Vixen Exec." Her humiliation was to be tomorrow's gossip column fodder. But then something shifted within her. Deep beneath the shock and the heartbreak, a core of steel long dormant began to glow. It was the legacy of her grandfather, a man who had built an empire from nothing and had taught her that dignity was the one thing no one could take from you unless you gave it away. She did not cry. She did not scream. She lifted her chin, her eyes locking onto Sebastian's for one final searing moment. She let him see the pain he had caused, but she also let him see that he had not and could not break her. She turned to her maid of honor, her best friend, Chloe, whose face was a mask of furious disbelief. "Chloe, my wrap, please." With a steady hand, Lena took the silk wrap and draped it over her shoulders. Then she turned to the crowd, her posture unnaturally straight. An elderly, distinguished-looking man with kind eyes and a grim face was already moving towards the aisle. It was Mr. Davies, her family's longtime confidant and lawyer. He reached her side, offering a silent, sturdy arm. Without a single word to Sebastian or Isabella, Lena Vance, the jilted bride, walked away from the altar. The sound of her heels clicking on the marble floor was the only sound in the cathedral, a crisp, defiant rhythm against the cacophony of whispers and camera shutters. She was walking away from Sebastian Thorne, but as the heavy oak doors closed behind her, everyone would soon learn she was walking towards her destiny. And Sebastian Thorne had just made the biggest, most catastrophic mistake of his life. The black Bentley purred through the gates of a sprawling estate in Westchester County, a world away from the media circus engulfing Manhattan. The property was a fortress of old-world elegance, shielded from prying eyes by a dense forest of ancient oaks and a formidable stone wall. This was Sterling Manor, a place that hadn't appeared in society pages for over 2 decades. This was Lena's real home. Mr. Davies escorted her into the grand library, a 2-story rotunda, where the scent of aged paper and lemon oil polish was a balm to her frayed soul. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow on the thousands of leather-bound books that lined the walls. Sitting in a high-backed armchair by the fire was Alistair Sterling, his face a roadmap of his 92 years. His eyes, though clouded with age, were as sharp and perceptive as ever. He was the patriarch, the titan behind Sterling Holdings, a multinational conglomerate with interests in everything from legacy media and sustainable technology to pharmaceuticals and, ironically, prime real estate. He was a legend, a ghost in the machine of global finance, and he was Lena's grandfather. He watched her as she entered his expression, a mixture of profound sadness and steely resolve. He didn't stand, but he opened his arms. Lena went to him, collapsing into his embrace, the facade of strength she had maintained in the cathedral finally crumbling. The tears came hot and silent. "He made his choice, my dear," Alistair said, his voice a low rumble. "And in doing so, he failed the test." Lena pulled back, wiping her eyes. "The test, grandfather. This was my life, my heart. It wasn't a game." "Everything is a game when a fortune of this magnitude is involved," he countered, gently but firmly. "I had to know. I had to be sure the man you married loved Lena Vance, the brilliant, kind-hearted book lover, not Lena Sterling, the heiress to a dynasty. I set a simple trap. I made it known through back channels that Sterling Holdings was looking for a new CEO from outside the family, that my sole heir was a simple girl with no interest in the business. It was bait. I wanted to see if Sebastian Thorne, a man obsessed with building his own empire, could truly love a woman he believed could add nothing to it. Today, we received our answer." The truth of it settled over Lena, a cold, clarifying weight. Her entire relationship had been the final stage of a decades-long plan to protect both her and the family legacy. Sebastian wasn't just unloving, he was unworthy. "So what now?" she asked, her voice gaining a sliver of its strength back. Alistair gestured to a large mahogany desk. On it lay a single, weighty portfolio bound in dark blue leather. "Now," he said, a glint in his eye. "You stop being Lena Vance. It is time for you to become who you were always meant to be." Mr. Davies stepped forward and opened the portfolio. Inside were documents, proxy statements, and a letter. It was Alistair's official abdication. He was stepping down as chairman of the board of Sterling Holdings and transferring his controlling interest, 51% of the company, to her, effective immediately. Lena stared at the documents, her name printed in stark black ink, Lena Sterling. "Me?" she breathed. "Grandfather. I'm an archivist. I know about 14th century manuscripts, not corporate takeovers." "Nonsense," Alistair scoffed. "You have the finest mind of anyone I know. You see patterns, you understand history, and business is merely history in the making. You have my blood in your veins, and Mr. Davies and our board will guide you. You will learn faster than you can imagine. Your first order of business, however, is personal." He pointed to a smaller file next to the portfolio. It was a dossier on Thorne Global Properties. "Sebastian Thorne believes he is a king," Alistair said, his voice turning to ice. "His entire empire is built on leverage and aggressive expansion. His flagship project, the Elysian Tower, is the cornerstone of his future. He has poured every ounce of his capital and reputation into it. But the project and his company has a vulnerability, a single point of failure." Mr. Davies opened the file. It was a property deed. "Thorne has acquired all the land for his project, except for one small, crucial parcel right in the center," the lawyer explained. "A historic, landmarked building. The city council has refused to let him demolish it. He has been trying to buy it for a year from its reclusive owner, a shell corporation based in Switzerland. He believes he is close to a deal." Lena looked from the deed to her grandfather, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Don't tell me." Alistair Sterling smiled, a rare and predatory sight. "That shell corporation is of course owned by Sterling Holdings. The deed to that building, my dear, is now yours. Sebastian Thorne's grand Elysian Tower cannot be built without your permission. His future is quite literally in your hands." Meanwhile, back in Manhattan, Sebastian and Isabella were celebrating at the Glass House, a private rooftop club overlooking Central Park. Champagne flowed as they toasted to their new future. "To us," Sebastian said, clinking his glass against hers. "To building something real, something that matters." "We shed your dead weight today, darling," Isabella purred, running a finger down his tie. "That mousy librarian was holding you back. You need a queen, not a kitten. Now with our combined strength, no one can stop us. What's the first move?" Sebastian's phone buzzed. It was a frantic text. Text from his chief operating officer. "Sebastian, we have a major problem. The deal for the Oakhaven building just fell through. The sellers pulled out. Worse, we just received a notice. The entire parcel was sold this morning to a new buyer." Sebastian frowned. "That's impossible. We were days away from closing." He quickly typed back, who bought it. The reply came a moment later, and Sebastian's blood ran cold. "A company we've never dealt with before. Sterling Holdings." Isabella read the text over his shoulder, her brow furrowing. "Sterling. I thought the old man Alistair was a recluse. They haven't made an aggressive real estate play in 30 years. Why now? Why that building?" Sebastian felt a knot of unease tighten in his stomach. It had to be a coincidence. A bizarre, terribly timed coincidence. It couldn't be anything more. He had just discarded Lena Vance. The name Sterling was just a ghost, a phantom from the city's past. He had no idea that the ghost had just woken up. And in a library in Westchester, a woman he had called Comfort was now studying the blueprints of his empire, preparing to dismantle it, piece by agonizing piece. The game had begun. 3 days later, the name on the lips of every power player in New York was Lena Sterling. She had made her entrance not at a gala or a charity ball, but on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. The article was a masterstroke of public relations, orchestrated by Sterling Holdings' veteran communications team. It featured a stunning portrait of Lena, no longer the soft, unassuming librarian, but a woman of formidable presence. Dressed in a tailored Armani suit, the color of midnight, her hair styled in a sleek, powerful cut. She stared out from the photograph with her grandfather's intelligent, unyielding eyes. The headline was simple and devastating. The Sterling Succession. Alistair Sterling Seedies, control of multi-billion-dollar empire to granddaughter Lena Sterling. The story detailed her quiet life as Lena Vance, and framed it not as a deception, but as a period of deliberate observation, a princess living amongst the people to understand the world she was destined to influence. It mentioned her academic credentials, her intelligence, and her deep respect for the Sterling legacy. There was no mention of Sebastian Thorne. There didn't need to be. The society pages connecting the dots with rabid glee did that for her. The jilted bride wasn't a charity case. She was a monarch who had just been handed her crown. In his penthouse office with panoramic views of the city he planned to conquer, Sebastian Thorne stared at the newspaper, a feeling of vertigo washing over him. "It can't be," he muttered, the paper trembling in his hand. "It's a trick. A different Lena Sterling, Isabella pacing the room like a caged panther, snatched the paper from him. "Don't be a fool, Sebastian. Look at her. It's her. The hair is different, the clothes are different, but the eyes are the same." She threw the paper onto his desk. "My God, you didn't just dump her. You publicly humiliated the sole heiress to one of the largest private fortunes on the continent. You picked a fight with a ghost, and the ghost turned out to be a goddess with a 9-figure credit line." The phone on Sebastian's desk rang shrill and insistent. It was his banker from Goldman Sachs. "Sebastian," the voice on the other end said, stripped of its usual congeniality. "We need to talk about the financing for the Elysian. Given the new developments regarding the Oakhaven parcel, the board is getting nervous. The stability of the project is in question. We need assurances." Before Sebastian could formulate a reply, another call came in. It was a key investor from Dubai, pulling his 9-figure commitment. The news was out. Thorn Global's flagship project was dead in the water, held hostage by the very woman its CEO had cast aside. Sebastian felt a cold sweat prickle his skin. This wasn't just a personal embarrassment. It was a corporate catastrophe. His reputation was built on his unerring instinct, his Midas touch. Now he looked like the world's biggest idiot. "Get me a meeting with her," Sebastian snarled at Isabella. "Now. Use every contact you have. I need to get in a room with her. I can fix this. I can reason with her." "Reason with her?" Isabella laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Sebastian, you told her she wasn't good enough to be your wife. You think she's going to sell you a building out of the goodness of her heart. This isn't a business negotiation anymore. This is a blood sport." But Isabella, ever the operator, made the calls. The answer that came back was swift and chilling. "Sterling is not available. All inquiries regarding the property at 24 Oak Street are to be directed to her legal team." No further comment. The message was clear. There would be no backroom deals, no personal appeals. This would be handled by the book through layers of lawyers and corporate procedure designed to bleed him dry. Lena, meanwhile, was holding her first official board meeting in the top-floor conference room of the Sterling Tower. The room was intimidating, a sleek expanse of glass and steel overlooking Central Park. But Lena felt surprisingly calm. She had spent the last 72 hours in a pressure cooker of briefings with Mr. Davies, absorbing decades of corporate history, strategy, and finance. Her archivist's mind, trained to find and connect disparate pieces of information, took to it with astonishing speed. She sat at the head of the table, the same spot her grandfather had occupied for 50 years. The board members, a collection of seasoned, silver-haired executives who had been skeptical at first, now watched her with a newfound respect. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady and clear. "Our first agenda item is Project Nightingale." This was her own name for the operation concerning Sebastian Thorn. "Thorn Global has made a preliminary offer of $200 million for the Oakhaven building," Mr. Davies reported. "That's already $50 million over market value. He's desperate." "Reject it," Lena said without hesitation. A board member, a gruff man named Marcus Thorn, no relation to Sebastian, a fact that had caused endless confusion, raised an eyebrow. "Ms. Sterling, respectfully, it's an incredible offer. We could make a significant profit." "Profit is not the primary objective here, Marcus," Lena stated calmly. "The objective is leverage. The Oakhaven building is a registered historical landmark. It was designed by my great-grandmother, an accomplished architect in her own right. We are not selling it. We are not demolishing it. We are going to restore it." She slid a new set of blueprints across the table. "I have commissioned the world's leading historical preservation architects. We are going to turn the Oakhaven building into the new global headquarters for the Sterling Arts Foundation. It will be a museum, a gallery, and a center for cultural preservation. We will break ground in 1 month. The board was silent, stunned by the audacity of the move. She wasn't just blocking Sebastian. She was building a monument to everything he had tried to destroy, right in the heart of his fallen dream. It was a strategic masterclass in humiliation. It told the world, "You wanted to build a monument to greed. I will build one to culture and legacy on its ashes." The move will generate immense public goodwill. Lena continued, her voice gaining momentum. It positions Sterling Holdings as a protector of heritage, not a destroyer of it. The tax implications are highly favorable, and the long-term value to our brand is immeasurable. Any questions? There were none. For the first time, the board saw not just Alistair's granddaughter, but a leader in her own right. A Sterling through and through. The news broke that afternoon. It wasn't an attack. It was a press release about a glorious new philanthropic venture. But for Sebastian Thorne, it was a declaration of war. He watched the report on a giant screen in his office, Isabella standing silently beside him. They showed renderings of the beautifully restored Oakhaven building, a jewel of classic architecture, and then they showed the plot map with the gaping, useless hole around it, where the Elysian Tower was meant to be. "She's not just blocking me," Sebastian said, his voice dangerously low. "She's mocking me. She's turning my biggest dream into her personal passion project." He slammed his fist on his desk, the force of it rattling a glass of water. "Fine. She wants a war. She'll get one. There are other ways to bring an opponent to their knees than through real estate." He looked at Isabella, his eyes burning with a new dark fire. "I want you to dig. I want to know everything about her. Every friend, every ex-boyfriend, every secret. No one lives a life that clean. Find me a weapon. Find me some dirt. If I can't attack her fortress, I'll attack her character. I'll drag the Sterling name through the mud until she begs me to stop." Isabella smiled, a slow, wicked curve of her lips. This she understood. This was her kind of fight. "Consider it done, darling. Her fairy tale is about to turn into a nightmare." The battle shifted from the boardrooms of Wall Street to the shadowy alleys of public opinion. Isabella Rossi, in her element, mobilized her network of journalists, gossip bloggers, and social media influencers. The campaign was insidious, a slow drip poison designed to erode Lena's carefully constructed image. It began subtly. An anonymous source in a tabloid column wondered if Lena's quiet life was actually a sign of instability, a period spent recovering in a discreet European clinic. A society blog posted unearthed photos of Lena from her college days, perfectly normal photos of her at a party holding a red plastic cup. But the captions hinted at a wild past she was desperate to hide. Then the attacks grew more personal and more vicious. They targeted her competence. An inside source at Sterling Holdings leaked a fabricated story to a financial news outlet, suggesting Lena was in over her head, a puppet for the old guard board members, and that her recent philanthropic venture was a reckless vanity project that was costing shareholders a fortune. Lena felt the sting of every article, every whisper. She had expected a business fight, a war of numbers and contracts. This was different. This was an assault on her identity. "They're painting me as either crazy stupid or a fraud," she said during a late-night strategy session with Mr. Davies and her new head of security, a former MI6 agent named Kincaid. "Every move we make, they twist into a weakness." "This is Isabella Rossi's signature," Kincaid said, his tone grim. He had compiled a thick dossier on her. She doesn't fight the facts. She manufactures a more appealing fiction. She creates doubt, and in the court of public opinion, doubt is as good as guilt. So how do we fight back? Lena asked, frustration lacing her voice. Do we release statements denying every lie we'll look defensive? No. Mr. Davies advised his calm, a steadying anchor. We do not engage on her turf. We do not sling mud. Your grandfather's rule was simple. Never wrestle with a pig. You get dirty, and besides, the pig likes it. We continue our strategy, and we launch a counter-offensive of our own. But ours will be based on the truth. The Sterling counter-offensive was a quiet storm. Their legal team began filing defamation lawsuits, not with loud press conferences, but with quiet, methodical precision that sent a chill through the media outlets publishing Isabella's stories. The message was clear: if you print a lie about Sterling, you will be held accountable in a court of law. Several smaller blogs retracted their stories immediately. Simultaneously, Lena's communications team launched a series of features on the real Lena Sterling. They didn't deny the old photos. They celebrated them in a feature for Vogue titled From Campus to CEO, framing her as a relatable modern woman. They didn't hide her past as a librarian. They highlighted it, running a segment on a major news network about how her skills as an archivist, finding value seeing patterns, preserving history, made her uniquely qualified to lead a legacy company like Sterling. While Isabella was fighting a war of shadows, Lena was building an empire of light. Sebastian, however, was growing impatient. The smear campaign wasn't working fast enough. His project was stalled, his investors were fleeing, and every day the magnificent Oakhaven building, now draped in scaffolding, bearing the Sterling crest, was a reminder of his powerlessness. This is taking too long, he raged at Isabella in his office. Her reputation is barely scratched, and my empire is bleeding out. I need something bigger, something that will cripple her. I'm working on it. Isabella snapped back, the strain beginning to show on her. But she's clean, Sebastian, annoyingly clean. Her life is an open book, and the book is boring. There's nothing here. Then find something that isn't in the book, he roared. Everyone has a secret, a past lover, a family scandal. What about her parents? They died when she was young, right? Car crash. Are we sure? Isabella's eyes lit up with a cruel spark. That is an interesting question. The new line of attack was monstrous. A notorious conspiracy blogger, funded by an anonymous source, published a lengthy post titled The Sterling Tragedy Accident or Assassination. It was a vile piece of fiction weaving a tale that suggested Alistair Sterling might have had a hand in his own son's death to maintain control of the company, and that Lena's secluded upbringing was a way to keep her quiet. The moment the story broke, Lena knew a line had been crossed. This wasn't about business or revenge anymore. This was about the desecration of her parents' memory. She was in her grandfather's study when she read it, the words on the screen, blurring through a film of furious tears. Alistair, reading over her shoulder, grew deathly still. The air in the room turned frigid. For the first time, Lena saw a look on his face she had never seen before, pure, unadulterated rage. He has gone too far, Alistair said, his voice a low, dangerous whisper. He has reached into my family's sacred ground and tried to poison it. He has mistaken my restraint for weakness. He looked at Lena, his eyes blazing. The time for leverage is over. The time for defense is over. Now we ruin him. He picked up the phone. Kincaid, get in here and bring me the red file. Mr. Davies, who was also in the room, paled slightly. Alistair, are you sure we agreed that was a weapon of last resort? He targeted my dead son, Alistair bit out. This is the last resort. Kincaid entered, holding a slim, crimson-colored portfolio. It contained the results of the deep-dive background check Sterling's security team had conducted on Sebastian Thorne when he first started dating Lena. It was standard procedure for the family, a way to vet anyone who got too close. Most files were thin. Sebastian's was not. Sebastian Thorne didn't build his first building with a bank loan and a dream, as his official story goes. Kincaid began opening the file. His seed money came from a man named Viktor Rykov, an oligarch with deep documented ties to organized crime. The money was dirty. We have the wire transfer records routed through a series of shell companies in the Cayman Islands. He continued, furthermore, his company has a pattern of acquiring properties through aggressive, often predatory means. For his Soho Tower project 5 years ago, a series of accidental fires broke out in the rent-controlled apartment buildings on the plot he needed forcing the tenants out. The fire marshal's report was inconclusive, but one of Thorne's junior executives was paid a substantial bonus a week later. The executive now lives in a country with no extradition treaty with the United States. The room was silent. This wasn't just dirt. This was potential criminal activity. Arson, money laundering. We held this back, Mr. Davies said quietly, because exposing it would trigger federal investigations and hurt a lot of innocent employees at Thorne Global. His concern for my innocent employees was zero when he publicly humiliated me. Lena said, her voice hard as diamond. The tears were gone, replaced by glacial fury. His concern was zero when he slandered my dead parents. He has forfeited any right to my mercy. She looked at her grandfather. He gave a single sharp nod. Kincaid, Lena commanded, her voice ringing with newfound authority. You are not to leak this to a gossip blog. You are to compile a full evidence-backed report. We are sending it to 2 places. She paused, taking a deep breath. This was the point of no return. The Department of Justice, she said, and the front page of the New York Times. The New York Times story broke on a Tuesday morning. It wasn't buried in the business section. It was the lead story above the fold, with a headline that hit the financial world like a seismic charge. Thorne's shadows. Investigation reveals tycoons' ties to organized crime. Allegations of arson and financial fraud. The article was a masterpiece of investigative journalism, meticulously documented and corroborated by banking records, sworn affidavits, and off-the-record confirmations from sources deep within the justice system. It laid out the dirty origins of Sebastian's seed money from Viktor Rykov and presented a damning timeline of the accidental fires that cleared the way for his Soho project. The implication was clear and unavoidable. Sebastian Thorne's empire was built on a foundation of criminality. The fallout was instantaneous and apocalyptic. By 9:31 a.m., just 1 minute after the opening bell trading on Thorne Global Properties stock, TGP was halted as its value plummeted by 70% in a torrent of panic selling. By 10:00 a.m., federal agents from the FBI and the SEC were streaming into TGP headquarters with warrants seizing computers' servers and boxes upon boxes of files. The images of grim-faced agents carrying out the heart of his company were broadcast on a live feed on every major news network. Sebastian watched it all from his penthouse apartment, the TV screen reflecting in his stunned, disbelieving eyes. The red file. He knew instinctively that this was Lena's doing. This wasn't a smear campaign of whispers and innuendo. This was a public execution with a guillotine made of facts. His phone, which had been ringing incessantly, fell silent. His powerful friends, his investors, his bankers, they weren't calling to offer support. They were running for cover, severing all ties to a man who had just become radioactive. Isabella was there, her face ashen, her usual composure completely gone. She was frantically packing a suitcase. "What are you doing?" Sebastian asked, his voice hollow. "What does it look like I'm doing? I'm getting out," she said, not even looking at him as she threw designer dresses and shoes into her luggage. "This is over, Sebastian. You're finished. The company is finished." "We can fight this," he said, a desperate edge to his voice. "You're a PR genius. You can spin this." She finally stopped and turned to him, her face a mask of contempt. "Spin this. Spin a federal racketeering investigation. Are you insane? I'm a PR executive, Sebastian, not a miracle worker. My job is to polish gems, not turds. And right now you are the biggest, most toxic turd in New York City." "But us," he stammered. "Our future. The empire we were going to build." Isabella let out a sharp, cruel laugh. "Our future. I hitched my wagon to what I thought was a rocket ship. It turns out it was a torpedo aimed at the ground. You brought this on yourself. You poked the bear, no, you poked the goddess, and she tore you to shreds. And I will not be dragged down into the rubble with you." She zipped her suitcase shut. "My name was on the PR retainers, not the loan agreements with mobsters. My lawyers are already drafting a statement attesting to my complete and total ignorance of your extracurricular fundraising. Goodbye, Sebastian." She walked out without a backward glance, leaving him alone in the silent, opulent apartment that now felt like a tomb. The empire was gone. The woman he'd chosen for her ambition had abandoned him the moment that ambition became untenable. All he was left with were the ghosts of his own choices, and the memory of Lena. In the crushing silence, his mind for the first time in years was clear of the noise of ambition and greed. He started to remember things. Not the grand gestures, but the small, quiet moments with Lena. The way she'd smile when she found a rare book. How she would make him hot tea when he came home exhausted, not asking about his deals, but about his day. He remembered their walk through Central Park, in the autumn, her hand in his, and how for a few hours he hadn't felt like Sebastian Thorne the tycoon, but just Sebastian, a man in love. He had called it comfort and dismissed it as a liability. Now in the wreckage of his life, he realized that comfort, that unconditional acceptance, was the only real thing he had ever possessed. He had traded a treasure for a trinket, and the trinket had turned to dust in his hands. The days that followed were a blur of legal meetings, depositions, and public shame. His assets were frozen. His company was being dismantled by receivers. The Elysian Tower project was officially declared dead, its vacant lot a monument to his hubris. The name Thorne, once a symbol of success, was now a byword for scandal. One evening broke, and broken he found himself standing across the street from the Oakhaven building. The scaffolding was down. The building was magnificent, restored to its former glory, its beautiful Beaux-Arts facade glowing under the warm evening lights. A banner hung above the entrance. The Sterling Vance Center for Cultural Heritage, opening soon. Sterling Vance. She had included her undercover name, the name he had known her by. It felt like a deliberate, final twist of the knife. It was a message meant only for him. I am still the woman you knew. I am still the woman you threw away. And this monument to my legacy is also a monument to your failure. He knew what he had to do. He had lost his company, his money, and his reputation. The only thing he had left to lose was his pride, and he realized it was worthless anyway. He had to see her. He had to face her one last time. The world shrinks when you lose everything. For Sebastian Thorne, it had collapsed to the size of a single city block, the one dominated by the imposing glass and steel edifice of the Sterling Tower. Getting a meeting with Lena Sterling was now harder than getting an audience with the Pope. His calls, once patched through to the most powerful people on earth, were now met with polite, impenetrable receptionists. His emails vanished into a digital abyss, likely filtered into a spam folder labeled "Disgraced Tycoons." He was a pariah, a ghost haunting the edges of a world that had violently ejected him. The walls of the Sterling Empire were seamless and absolute. So he waited. It was all he had left to do. Stripped of his purpose, this vigil became his new pathetic occupation. He stood on the sidewalk opposite the tower's entrance, a man who once owned skylines, now reduced to studying the comings and goings of a single building. The press in the first couple of days had been relentless. They took photos of him, a pathetic, hollowed-out figure in a wrinkled suit, his once commanding presence replaced by a haunted, desperate air. He didn't care. Humiliation was his new reality, a garment he wore as constantly as his own skin. After the third day, the reporters lost interest, moving on to the next scandal. He was left alone with the city's indifferent crowds. People bustled past him, a river of ambition and purpose, none of them giving a second glance to the man who was once a titan among them. He watched reflections in the shop windows, not his own, which he couldn't bear to face, but the reflection of the tower. He watched the sun glint off its highest floors, the floors where she was orchestrating a world that no longer had a place for him. It was late on the third afternoon when it happened. A sleek black Bentley, silent as a shadow, pulled away from the tower's private exit. Sebastian's heart hammered against his ribs. He knew it was her car. He had bought it for her as a birthday gift, a lifetime ago. He stepped forward, not aggressively but with a defeated slump to his shoulders, his eyes fixed on the tinted rear window. For a long, agonizing moment, the car continued to move. He felt a familiar wave of despair wash over him. Of course. Why would she stop? Then, unbelievably, the brake lights glowed. The car glided to a halt. Through the dark glass, he could just make out her silhouette. He saw her head turn slightly. Then, with a subtle nod to her driver, the rear door clicked open. It wasn't a welcome. It was a summons, an invitation into the lion's den. He scrambled across the street, his legs unsteady. He slid into the opulent interior, and the door closed with a soft, definitive thud, sealing him inside. The silence was immediate and crushing, a physical weight that pressed down on him. The city's noise vanished, replaced by a stillness heavier than any conversation. The interior smelled of expensive leather, and Lena's faint, clean scent jasmine and old paper. The scent that had once meant home now triggered a deep, profound ache in the hollow of his chest. She didn't look at him. She stared straight ahead, her profile etched against the window as the car began to move silently through the city traffic. "You wanted to see me, Sebastian," she said, her voice a calm, level instrument. It was not angry, not triumphant, not even sad. It was chillingly neutral, the voice of a CEO addressing a minor, unscheduled inconvenience. "You have 5 minutes." The words, so devoid of emotion, were more cutting than any scream would have been. He swallowed, trying to find his voice. "Lena, he began, but his own name for her sounded foreign and wrong in his mouth. His voice cracked, and he had to start again. "I am so sorry. For everything. What I did at the altar, it was unforgivable. I know that. I was a fool. A blind, arrogant, pathetic fool." She remained silent, her posture perfect, her hands resting calmly in her lap. Her stillness was unnerving. It offered him no anger to fight against, no sadness to appeal to. It was a void. He forged ahead, the words spilling out of him in a desperate, clumsy torrent. "I spent my whole life chasing a version of success that didn't exist. A phantom. I thought power was about acquiring things, buildings, companies, influence. I thought love was a transaction, a merger, a partnership that had to have a clear return on investment." He finally risked a glance at her. Her profile was like a cameo carved from ivory, beautiful and impossibly remote. Isabella. She wasn't the cause. She was a symptom. She was a reflection of my own worst impulses, the ugliest parts of my ambition. Choosing her was like choosing a part of myself I thought I needed to win. He saw a muscle flicker in her jaw, the only sign she was even listening. "I see it now," he said, his voice dropping to a raw whisper. The polished veneer of the tycoon was gone, flayed away to reveal the broken man underneath. "I see what I threw away. It wasn't about the money, Lena. I swear to you. If I had known about your family, your name, it wouldn't have mattered, because I was too blind to see the real value right in front of me. What I threw away was you. Your kindness, your quiet strength, the way you saw me, not my net worth. I had everything that mattered in you, and I was too stupid to realize it." He finally broke the weight of his regret, crushing the air from his lungs. His shoulders slumped, and he covered his face with his hands. "I've lost everything. My company, my reputation, and I deserve it. I deserve all of it. I'm not here to ask for the building back. I'm not here to ask for anything. I'm just here to say, I'm sorry. And that I loved you. I really did. I was just too broken to know what to do with it." The car came to a smooth, silent stop. Sebastian looked up, disoriented. They were outside a small, unassuming building in Greenwich Village. For a heart-stopping second, he didn't recognize it. Then it hit him. It was the library, her old library. Lena finally turned her head and looked at him, her gaze direct and unyielding. Her eyes were clear, steady, and held no trace of the adoring woman he had left at the altar. The warmth was gone, replaced by a hard, brilliant clarity. "You say it wasn't about the money, Sebastian," she said, her voice soft but laced with steel. "But your actions say otherwise. You didn't just leave me. You publicly humiliated me in the most calculated way possible. In front of our friends, our families, and the world, you weighed my worth and found it lacking. The irony is you were simply looking at the wrong ledger." She gestured with one elegant hand toward the library window. "You see that building? That's where I was happy. That's where I felt rich. My worth wasn't in a hidden trust fund. It was in the quiet, meaningful life I had built for myself on my own terms. A life you looked at and deemed insufficient." She leaned in slightly, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of the fire she now possessed, the same fire that had belonged to her grandfather. "And then the moment you discovered your catastrophic error in judgment, you didn't apologize. You didn't repent. You and your mistress tried to destroy me. You attacked my competence, my character. And then you committed the one unforgivable sin. You desecrated the memory of my parents. You did that, Sebastian. Not a businessman protecting his assets. Not a tycoon fighting a war. a cruel man lashing out because his ego was bruised. The truth of her words hit him with the force of a physical blow. He had no defense. There was nothing to say. She was right on every count. "The red file," she said, confirming his deepest suspicion without a trace of triumph. "We had that information long before the wedding. My grandfather believes in being prepared. We never would have used it. We are not in the business of ruining people. It's messy and frankly beneath us. But you forced my hand. You declared total war on a person, not a corporation. You made it about my soul, my family's honor. So I had to show you what total war actually looked like." With a quiet grace, she opened her door. "This is where our conversation ends. Forever." "Lena, please," he begged, a last desperate plea from a drowning man. "Is there nothing left? No chance for forgiveness? For anything?" She paused at the door and looked back at him, her face unreadable. It wasn't pity he saw in her eyes, but perhaps the cold finality of a closing chapter. "The woman you loved or thought you loved was Lena Vance," she said, her voice softening just enough to make the words cut even deeper. "And the man she loved was a fantasy she built in her head. Neither of those people exist anymore. You destroyed them both that day at the altar." She stepped out of the car, and without looking back, closed the door. The quiet, solid click echoed the closing of a vault. Sebastian watched her walk away, her posture straight, her steps. Sure, a queen returning to her kingdom, leaving him stranded in the wreckage of his own making. The partition slid down, and the driver's eyes met his in the rearview mirror. "Where to, sir?" Sebastian Thorne had no answer. The question was absurd. Where does a ghost go? He had nowhere left to be, no one left to see. He had flown as close to the sun as a man could, but he had been burned not by the fire of his ambition, but by the ice of his own heartless betrayal. The checkmate was complete. He hadn't just lost the game. He had been erased from the board. In the end, Sebastian Thorne learned the hardest lesson of all true wealth is not measured in stock prices or square footage, but in character. And his was bankrupt. He had the world at his fingertips and chose a handful of dust blinded by a greed so profound he couldn't recognize a priceless treasure right in front of him. Lena Sterling didn't just reclaim her birthright. She forged a new destiny from the ashes of her heartbreak, proving that the greatest power lies not in what you inherit, but in who you choose to become. What do you think? Was Lena's revenge justified, or did she go too far? Could Sebastian ever truly be redeemed? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. This story is a powerful reminder that karma, like the market, always settles its debts. Do you believe that walls can talk? That sometimes the very bricks around us hold stories too raw, too tangled to speak aloud? This is the story of a man who shattered hearts and trust in one swift stroke, erasing his unborn baby's name from the nursery wall. Little did he know that fate would carve that same name into the towering facade of his company's newest building. Love, ambition, betrayal, and redemption twist through every corridor of this tale. Buckle in for a journey that delves into hidden pasts and uncertain futures, where every character holds a key to a devastating secret. The late afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of Alexander Haven's corner office at Horizon Global Ventures. The golden light cast a halo on the gleaming awards and plaques that lined the walls, each one echoing the success that the Haven family had worked generations to achieve. Alexander, A tall, imposing figure with silver-streaked hair at just 38 leaned back in his leather chair, drumming his fingers on the polished mahogany desk. His gaze cold and distant, fixed on an ornate pen, an anniversary gift from his wife, Cassandra. In that moment, the pen symbolized everything that had once been simple and hopeful in his life. Now it only served as a reminder of secrets he had kept, the people he had hurt. He had always prided himself on his ability to control every variable in his life. But as the afternoon light drifted across the office, he realized control had slipped through his fingers the very day he found out Cassandra was pregnant. They had never spoken much about children before. Sure, there were the passing fantasies of a large family, or a small one, depending on the day, but their careers always took center stage. Cassandra was a brilliant architect who had designed luxury estates from London to Bali. It was her passion, her calling. She had come from a humble background, and each building she created was a testament to how far she'd climbed. Alexander's phone buzzed. The name on the caller ID read Cassandra, and he felt a rush of guilt swirl inside him. She'd called 5 times that day, and each call had gone to voicemail. Now, perhaps out of reflex, he answered. Cassandra's voice was tight. She used his pet name, though the warmth that usually accompanied it was missing. "We need to talk. I'm at the house." Alexander swallowed. "I'll be there soon." He left the office without a backward glance, ignoring the stares of his employees as he stalked past glass-walled conference rooms. He drove to their estate on the outskirts of the city, a sprawling piece of land overshadowed by centuries-old oaks. The driveway alone was half a mile of winding pavement lined with perfectly manicured hedges. When he finally stepped inside, an uneasy silence welcomed him. Years ago, upon first acquiring the property, he and Cassandra had dreamed of filling those halls with laughter. Children's voices, dinner parties, new memories. They even had a room at the end of the upstairs corridor, designated as a nursery, its walls once adorned with gentle pastel colors. A rocking chair Cassandra's grandmother had passed down, and a small name plaque they'd chosen for their soon-to-be child, the child who would never come. He found Cassandra in the nursery. The walls were now blank, the rocking chair shoved into a corner. She stood with her back to him, arms crossed, shoulders trembling. "What have you done?" Her voice was steady, yet thick with pain. Alexander closed his eyes for a moment. He had instructed the staff to repaint the nursery and remove all traces of the name they had once agreed upon Adrian. It had been a reckless, impulsive decision, one made out of heartbreak and the fear of being haunted by a memory of what could have been. Losing the baby had hit him in a place he never knew existed, so he did the one thing that made sense at the time: erase everything that reminded him of it. Cassandra turned, revealing tears clinging to her lashes. "We never even talked about it," she whispered. "You just had them remove his name, like he never existed." "I couldn't stand it," Alexander said, his voice low. "Couldn't stand walking by this room and seeing that name every day. It hurt too much." She stared at him, eyes glassy with betrayal. "Hurt too much? For whom? For you?" She took a trembling breath. "Because I still dream of him at night. I wake up and forget he's gone. And now there's nothing left of him at all, except the emptiness." His throat burned. He wanted to hold her, to promise her it would be okay. But the chasm between them felt too wide. Cassandra brushed past him, leaving only the scent of her expensive perfume and heartbreak in the air. He stood in the barren nursery, haunted by the absence of the name that used to be there. He thought about how that single act of painting over a memory had torn him and Cassandra further apart, and he wondered if they would ever find their way back. Yet destiny had other plans. The name he'd buried was about to resurface in a place he'd never expect, etched in stone on the facade of a building that would soon reshape both their lives. Long before he met Cassandra, Alexander Haven was raised in a world of opulence. The Havens were a known name in Massachusetts, their family wealth tracing back to old shipping lines that made fortunes in the 19th century. Over time, their empire evolved into real estate investment banking and eventually high-tech ventures. Alexander's father, Gordon Haven, was a formidable presence, meticulous, shrewd, and intimidating. He had raised Alexander with the mantra, legacy. First, everything else second. While this instilled in Alexander a relentless drive for success, it also planted deep insecurities. He had grown to view relationships as stepping stones or potential pitfalls. Even in personal matters, he measured the risk and potential reward. Growing up, he rarely visited friends' homes, almost never had a slumber party or carefree evening away from the watchful eyes of his father and their entourage of staff. He was groomed for leadership, taught to win at any cost. Cassandra Delgado was nothing like the women in Alexander's social circle. A self-made prodigy, her architectural breakthroughs in eco-friendly designs caught the attention of environmentalists, real estate moguls, and philanthropists alike, including Bill and Melinda Gates, who admired her commitment to sustainability. Some whispered that she was on the short list to design a new philanthropic research center that Mark Zuckerberg was rumored to be funding. No one dared question her brilliance. She had an almost mystical ability to see aesthetics and engineering as two halves of the same whole. They met at a fundraising gala for a children's hospital in Boston. Cassandra was there to pitch a new pediatric ward design concept, one that would integrate nature-inspired spaces to comfort children during treatments. Alexander, ironically, was there to represent the Haven family's charitable giving, something that always gave them positive publicity, though the real philanthropic intentions were sometimes overshadowed by the press releases. Their connection was instant, and it went beyond physical attraction. Alexander, drawn to her fiery determination, found himself opening up in ways he never had. Cassandra, for her part, saw in him a man who yearned for genuine passion outside his business fortress. They talked about innovative building designs, philanthropic aspirations, and the ways architecture could shape a better future. Where Alexander was methodical, Cassandra was creative. Where he built walls, she tore them down. They married quickly, too quickly, some said, and formed what Boston's high society regarded as the power couple of the decade. At first, Alexander integrated Cassandra into the Haven empire, seamlessly trusting her insight to innovate in areas where the family's vision had grown stale. In turn, she reveled in the resources the Haven family's wealth provided, designing experimental complexes, advanced living facilities, and eco-conscious high-rises. Yet as the months wore on, Alexander's father Gordon began to question Cassandra's long-term loyalty. She wasn't from their world. Old money had a certain set of unspoken rules, and Cassandra wasn't one to follow them blindly. Over time, tensions rose. Cassandra refused to let the Haven name overshadow her personal identity. She pressed for her own brand recognition in architectural circles, which Gordon felt threatened the collective family prestige. Alexander stood uncomfortably between his father and his wife, often appeasing one at the expense of the other. Then came the pregnancy. For a moment, everything looked bright. Both Alexander and Cassandra believed that introducing a new life into their family might unify them in a deeper way. Gordon, too, softened at the idea of a grandchild to continue the Haven line. The baby would be named Adrian, after Cassandra's beloved grandfather, who had encouraged her to pursue architecture before he passed. The pregnancy also aligned with a major business venture. Alexander was spearheading an enormous real estate project in downtown Boston. He'd collaborated with City Hall to turn a derelict block into a modern corporate park, one that would bear the Haven name and stand as a testament to the family's ongoing influence. But fate was cruel. Complications led to a tragic miscarriage. Cassandra spiraled into grief, and Alexander retreated behind his stoic walls, shutting out his own pain. It was easier for him to bury it beneath new projects, negotiations, and deals than to face the magnitude of what they lost. And so the nursery remained untouched, a silent reminder, until the day he decided to erase Adrian's name from its walls. The heartbreak in Cassandra's eyes that afternoon was not something that could be easily fixed. Their once tightly woven tapestry of ambition and love was unraveling. Little did either of them know just how violently the threads would be pulled apart by events lurking on the horizon. Time marched on. Work never stopped at Horizon Global Ventures. The real estate project that Alexander had been orchestrating, officially dubbed the Haven Complex, was inching closer to its grand unveiling. This multi-building campus promised to revitalize downtown Boston, merging state-of-the-art office spaces with green rooftops, large communal parks, and advanced energy-efficient technologies. Cassandra had contributed some early design concepts before her grief took her away from many responsibilities, and Alexander had allowed her that distance, not wanting to impose further stress. One crisp morning, Alexander's mind was spinning through a dozen tasks as he stepped out of his black SUV in front of the nearly completed Haven complex. He was there to do a final walkthrough before the massive media event scheduled 2 weeks later. Broad columns flanked an enormous plaza in the center of the development, lined with glass-clad towers that reached skyward. The sweet tang of fresh cement and the buzz of construction filled the air. His team of architects and investors trailed behind him, bustling with excitement to show off the progress. Alexander nodded politely, scanning the site with a practiced gaze. They crossed the plaza and approached the main tower, which soared upwards in shimmering glass and steel. A large ceremonial wall next to the entrance was reserved for a special unveiling, an inscription dedicated to the vision and future of the Haven legacy. Rumor had it that Alexander intended to carve a quote or place an emblem to commemorate the family's dedication to progress. Just as they were about to enter the tower, the site manager Miriam Kelly hurried up to Alexander with an odd look on her face. "Mr. Haven," she said, pushing her black-rimmed glasses up her nose. "We've discovered something on the decorative facade. It wasn't part of the official design, but it appears to be etched deep into the stone. It will take significant effort and time to remove." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "Etched like graffiti?" "Not exactly. It's a name, sir." She paused, swallowing hard. "Adrian." In an instant, Alexander's heart dropped. He stiffened. The mere mention of that name here in the heart of his largest development felt like a cosmic punch to the gut. "How did it get there?" he demanded, voice taut. "We're still investigating," she replied, voice hushed. "It's small, but it's chiseled in a way that's deliberate, with actual stone carving techniques. Not just some random tagger with a spray can. It's on a corner of the decorative stone panel just to the right of the building's main entrance. We can remove it, but it will leave a visible patch unless we replace the entire panel, which might take weeks to to reorder and install. A swirl of memories and guilt flooded Alexander. He could still see Cassandra's tear-stained eyes the day he repainted the nursery walls. Why here, why now? Was this some act of sabotage, or was it a bizarre coincidence? He turned to his team, feigning control. Gather the crew. Let's see this for ourselves. They walked around to the side of the building near the main entrance. Indeed, on the lower corner of a heavy stone block, in ornate script no more than 3 inches tall, he saw the name Adrian. It glinted in the morning light, as if mocking him. The cut was smooth, professionally done. Alexander felt as though the ghost of his child had found a way to appear at the very heart of his business empire. The crowd of engineers and project managers murmured, but none dared speak the name aloud again. Everyone felt the tension rippling from Alexander. Finally, he cleared his throat. Get the best stonemason to see if it can be carefully removed without replacing the entire block, he said, scanning their faces. And I want a full investigation. Check security footage. See who came through here. This is private property. There must be cameras. Miriam nodded. Yes, Mr. Haven. As the group filed away, Alexander stared at the etched name. Questions churned in his mind. Was someone trying to torment him? Or was it Cassandra, grappling with the memory of Adrian in her own anguished way? He knew she was a talented designer, but stone carving was not her skill set. Still, doubt flickered. He traced the letters with his fingertips, fighting the tightness in his chest. Adrian. A child who never got a chance at life, but who somehow kept reappearing. No matter how hard he tried to erase the name, it found its way back. The day after discovering the name on the building, Alexander hardly slept. Anxiety wrapped around him like a vice fueled by a new wave of tension at home. Cassandra, though physically present at their estate, felt emotionally distant. She had withdrawn to her personal design studio behind the house, offering no explanation for her absences or solitary nights. At the office, Alexander was met with an undercurrent of gossip. Employees whispered in hallways, exchanging glances when he passed. He knew they suspected something, that the etched name must hold personal significance. The Haven Empire might have soared on the wings of success, but it also flew through corridors built on secrets and half-truths. Desperate for answers, Alexander plunged himself into the security footage from the site. Along with Miriam and a small group of trusted IT specialists, he spent hours scrubbing through camera angles. They found little out of the ordinary, no suspicious intruders, no after-hours trespassers. The building's exterior cameras had either not been angled to that specific patch of stone or were obscured by scaffolding. It was possible that someone had hidden in a blind spot, but a near-total blank didn't satisfy him. He was certain there had to be more. Someone must have had both motive and access. Then a glitch on one camera's timestamp caught his eye. A short segment, no more than 15 minutes, was missing from the official logs. He turned to the IT specialist, a wiry young man named Conrad. "You see this?" Alexander said, pointing to the gap. "We're missing footage between 2:30 and 2:45 a.m. last Tuesday." Conrad tapped on his keyboard, sweat forming at his temples. "It looks like a forced corruption in the data. Someone with advanced knowledge of our systems might have done this deliberately." Alexander's fury rose. He felt his hands clench into fists. "We pay for state-of-the-art security, yet here we are. I want a list of everyone who had access to these cameras that night." Conrad nodded. "Of course, Mr. Haven." As the day wore on, a handful of potential suspects emerged, employees, contractors or external tech consultants who had the clearance to handle or manipulate the security feeds. But none stood out as having a personal vendetta to carve Adrian into the building's facade. As far as Alexander knew, that name and its significance were known only to family and a few close friends. Just before evening, he slipped away from the office to pay an unannounced visit to Cassandra's personal design studio. It was a minimalist glass annex behind their main residence, filled with sprawling drafting tables, half-finished models, and large windows overlooking a secluded garden. He found her hunched over a blueprint, wearing a plain black turtleneck and leggings. She barely acknowledged him when he stepped inside. "We need to talk," he said, his voice gentler than he intended. The tension between them was suffocating, but anger wouldn't help. She shrugged, maintaining focus on the blueprint. "About what?" He took a step closer. The name etched on the new building. Adrian. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? She stood up slowly, her eyes narrowed in astonishment. "What makes you think I would do that?" Alexander exhaled. "I'm not accusing you of anything, but you've been distant, and I know how important Adrian's memory is to you. This could be some act of grief." She paced across the studio, frustration evident. "So because I'm grieving, I'd break into your construction site in the dead of night and carve our baby's name on stone. Is that really what you think of me, Alexander?" He winced at the use of his full name. "I just need answers." Cassandra's eyes brimmed with tears. "I can't even stand looking at that building. It reminds me of what you did to the nursery, wiping away Adrian's name like he never existed. I'm not stepping foot near your precious Haven complex, let alone defacing it." Alexander stared at the floor. Guilt and suspicion clashed in his chest. He wanted to believe her. Over the years, she'd proven herself to be honorable and true, even if they were drifting apart. She picked up a small clay model she was working on, a conceptual piece for a pediatric clinic in Honduras. "This is how I honor Adrian," she said softly, tapping the model. "By designing places that help children. Because that was our dream, wasn't it? To do something meaningful for families. That dream died a little the day you repainted that room." Stung. Alexander nodded, unable to muster a response. He turned to leave, pausing at the door. "If you remember anything that might help, or if you see anything suspicious, you'll tell me." She nodded, though her expression made it clear she believed if Alexander really cared about her, he'd know how deeply he'd wounded her. He left the studio feeling colder than when he'd arrived. Over the next week, Alexander's frustrations mounted. His father Gordon, who had been conspicuously absent for months, supposedly overseas on business, unexpectedly returned. Gordon always had a knack for appearing at the worst possible time. One evening, he summoned Alexander to the Old Haven mansion in Beacon Hill, the historic family seat that Alexander had avoided since his childhood. Alexander arrived to find Gordon waiting in the study, a cavernous room lined with dusty tomes and antique furniture that smelled like old leather. 2 crystal glasses of expensive cognac sat on the table untouched. Son Gordon said, his deep voice echoing. "I've been hearing rumors. Something about the name Adrian carved into your new building. Care to explain?" Alexander's jaw clenched. He'd never told his father the baby's name. That was a conversation he and Cassandra had reserved for themselves, at least until the time was right. But perhaps gossip traveled faster than respect for privacy in Boston's elite circles. "Nothing to explain," Alexander replied, forcing calm. "It's vandalism, and I'm handling it. Gordon's expression was measured. "I understand losing a child is hard, but you need to keep your head in the game. The city is watching, the press is circling. You're set to be the face of this grand opening. Anything that smells of scandal or strife will tarnish the Haven name." Alexander's shoulders tensed. "Is that all you care about? The name not once have you asked how Cassandra or I are coping." Gordon's straightened lips pressed into a thin line. "Grief is personal. I'm not your therapist, but I do know the family legacy must remain intact. If you can't manage to keep it that way, I will step in." The threat lingered in the room like a noxious gas. Alexander took a long sip of the cognac, letting the burn steady his nerves. He was used to his father's cold approach to family matters. Showing vulnerability in front of Gordon was akin to bleeding in shark-infested waters. "That won't be necessary," Alexander said, determined. "I've got it under control." Gordon nodded, but the glint in his eyes said otherwise. "I trust you'll do what must be done." Their conversation ended abruptly. Alexander left, feeling the old mansion's oppressive weight crushing him. He hated that place. It reminded him of lonely childhood nights locked away in a stiff bedroom, while tutors and nannies drilled into him that everything was about legacy and image. Back at the estate, he found Cassandra's design studio empty. A quick text revealed she had gone to New York for a last-minute architecture symposium. In the past, she would have told him about any travel plans. He knew she was pulling away, forging her independence again, and it both frightened and angered him. Days marched on with no new leads about the carved name. The IT team found no conclusive evidence, and the stonemasons insisted it would cost tens of thousands of dollars to fix the etched stone, and that was assuming the project schedule could accommodate such a significant delay. With the grand opening fast approaching, Alexander faced a choice: reveal the name at the event, and risk a media circus, or patch it in a rushed manner, leaving an obvious scar on what was meant to be a pristine facade. He tried to push it from his mind by immersing himself in finalizing the details of the opening ceremony. He'd invited a roster of high-profile personalities, local politicians, celebrities, and philanthropic figures, even hoping to secure a cameo from Warren Buffett, who was rumored to be investing in a sustainable housing initiative. The event in many ways was a tribute to the Haven Empire's commitment to the future. Yet as the big day loomed, Alexander couldn't shake the eerie feeling that the name Adrian was more than a mere vandalism or cosmic coincidence. It felt like a reckoning for the callous way he had tried to paint over the nursery, to bury the sorrow too quickly. At last, the morning of the grand opening arrived. A crisp autumn breeze whipped through downtown Boston, sending leaves swirling around the newly laid plaza. Technicians bustled, finalizing the stage and sound systems. Towering banners bearing the Haven family crest fluttered from newly installed flagpoles. Alexander had spent the previous night practicing his speech in front of a mirror. He stood now backstage, wearing a tailored charcoal suit. Journalists with cameras angled for the best shot. Officials from City Hall mingled, and a small band rehearsed soft classical tunes. Despite the outward pomp, his mind was a tempest. He glanced at his phone, hoping to see a text from Cassandra, but there was nothing. She was back in Boston, but had not confirmed her attendance. He drew a slow breath, stepping onto the stage, as the announcer introduced him with a flourish. His speech began smoothly enough, praising Boston's heritage, the dedication of the City Council, the employees of Horizon Global Ventures, and the bright future symbolized by the Haven complex. He had a practiced way with words, honed by years of press conferences and philanthropic galas. Then his eyes caught a glimpse of someone unexpected in the crowd: Cassandra. She stood at the back, arms folded, her expression unreadable. For a moment his voice faltered, but he forged ahead. Applause peppered his speech. Lights flashed, cameras rolled. He concluded with a statement on legacy, how the Haven family strived to build not just buildings, but also hope for the next generation. The audience clapped politely. Alexander turned, motioning toward the large drape that covered the ceremonial inscription on the wall near the building's main entrance. As the drape fell away, it revealed the words, "For innovation, for progress, for the future." The crowd erupted in cheers, but the stone just beneath still carried the small yet haunting name, Adrian, now partially obscured by a subtle attempt at patchwork. The name remained legible up close, and soon curious murmurs rippled through the attendees. The tension in Alexander's stomach coiled. He stepped down from the podium, greeting officials and exchanging forced smiles. Media swarmed, some noticing the strange etching on the stone. He braced for the questions, though he prayed none would come. Yet they did. "Mr. Haven, can you comment on the name etched beneath your new inscription?" Alexander stiffened, but forced a measured smile. "We had a minor issue with vandalism. It's already being addressed." Before more questions could swarm, an older man approached someone Alexander recognized from his father's entourage, Charles Deering, a retired advisor who had served the Haven family for decades. His grey eyes flickered with concern. "We should speak privately," Charles said, guiding Alexander away from the crowd. They slipped into a side passage of the building's lobby. Smooth marble floors reflected the overhead lights. Charles wasted no time. "I believe I have information about who might have carved that name," he said. "I didn't speak sooner because I wasn't entirely sure, but new evidence came to my attention." Alexander's pulse quickened. "Go on." Charles fished an envelope from inside his coat. "Someone sent me still images from a CCTV feed, dated the night the carving must have happened. However, they're from an external camera across the street, not your official site cameras." Alexander took the envelope and peered at the black and white stills. The images showed a figure in a hooded jacket near the building's entrance. The figure stooped in the exact spot where the name was later found. Despite the angle and darkness, it was clearly not Cassandra. The person appeared stockier, with broader shoulders. He flipped through more images. One partial side view, though grainy, made his chest tighten. The face was partially visible, just enough to recognize him as Elias Ward, a childhood friend of Alexander's who had once worked at Horizon Global Ventures, but left under tense circumstances. Elias's family had once been in business with the Havens, but a few years back, Elias had been ousted amid a scandal that implicated him in a questionable real estate deal. Alexander hadn't spoken to him since. He looked up at Charles. "Elias. Why would he do this?" Charles frowned. "He's harbored resentment for a long time. It's possible he knew about your baby's name. He might have learned it from staff or overheard it from your father's lips." Shaken, Alexander clutched the photos. It made sense in a twisted way. Elias was cunning, and if he wanted to strike at Alexander's psyche, carving Adrian into the building was a cruel but potent way to do it. "But how did he manage to force a corruption in our security footage?" Alexander asked. "He's an IT expert, or at least he has connections," Charles replied. "He could have bribed someone." Rage simmered in Alexander's veins. Elias had taken a private tragedy and warped it into a weapon. The whole fiasco with the building was to undermine Alexander, to remind him that no matter how high you climb, your vulnerabilities can still be used against you. Charles placed a hand on Alexander's shoulder. Be careful. Confronting him without evidence could be risky, but at least you now know who you're dealing with." Alexander nodded, pulses of adrenaline flooding his system. The revelation brought no solace. If anything, it deepened the emotional turmoil. He glanced toward the exit, spotting Cassandra watching him from afar. Her eyes flicked from him to the envelope in his hand, curiosity evident. He couldn't confront Elias publicly, not at that moment. But he had a sinking feeling that the worst was yet to come. That evening, after the event ended and the crowd dispersed, Alexander found Cassandra in the estate's expansive kitchen, rummaging for a late-night snack. The overhead light illuminated her exhaustion. She looked up as he entered, the question in her gaze, wordless but clear. He set the envelope on the marble island. It was Elias Ward. She blinked, confused. Elias? I haven't heard that name in ages. He carved Adrian's name on the building. Alexander nodded, pulling out the still images and laying them before her. He had access knowledge and a grudge. It's all here. She studied the images, her face darkening. I still don't understand his motive. Revenge. I had to let him go from Horizon a few years back, after he'd jeopardized one of our major deals. He's held a grudge ever since. Cassandra let out a slow breath. So in his twisted mind, your grief became his ammunition. That's beyond cruel. Alexander reached for her hand, longing for a connection they'd both neglected. I'm sorry. For how I handled everything with Adrian. For how I erased his name from the nursery. None of this justifies that, but I want you to know I regret it. She didn't pull away. I know you hurt too, Alec, but it felt like you tried to wash him out of our lives the moment it got too painful. He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. I was wrong. They stood in quiet sorrow, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. For the first time in what felt like ages, they seemed united by the same sense of loss. Finally, Cassandra spoke. What are you going to do about Elias? Alexander inhaled. Confront him, but carefully. For now, I'll gather more definitive proof. Maybe we can keep it out of the courts. I just want him to understand there are consequences. Cassandra set the photos aside. I'll help however I can. It wasn't a declaration of forgiveness or a renewal of vows, but it was a step one that made Alexander's chest loosen just a fraction. 2 days later, Alexander received a cryptic text on his personal phone. We should talk. I have information you don't want made public. The bar at the Old Derby on Salem Street, 9 p.m. Come alone. It was unsigned, but the message felt like a signature of its own. Elias. Alexander hesitated. This was precisely the kind of clandestine meeting that could lead to a confrontation. Still, he needed to settle the issue. The swirl of rumors around the Haven complex had grown. Several local blogs were speculating about the mysterious name. He couldn't afford for the gossip to infect the project's reputation further, or to exploit Cassandra's private grief. At 9 p.m. sharp, Alexander arrived at the Old Derby, a dimly lit bar with dark wood booths and an ancient, dusty chandelier. No sign announced who owned it, but it was an open secret that the place was a hangout for shady deals and hush-hush conversations. He spotted Elias in a corner booth, swirling a half-empty glass of whiskey. Shorter than Alexander, but built sturdier. Elias had a face etched by cynicism. He smirked when he saw Alexander approach. I knew you'd come, Elias said, motioning for Alexander to sit. Alexander slid into the booth, crossing his arms. "You've got a lot of nerve. Carving Adrian's name. My baby's name into my building to prove some twisted point." Elias raised a brow. "It got your attention, didn't it?" Alexander bristled. "What do you want?" Elias sipped his whiskey. "An apology. Compensation. A chance at redemption. There was a time we were close friends, Alexander. I grew up with you. We planned on conquering the world together, but you kicked me to the curb without a second thought." "You committed fraud," Alexander hissed. "I had no choice." "You always have a choice," Elias corrected. "And I might have some interesting pieces of information that, if leaked, could shine a less than rosy light on your precious Haven empire. Not to mention some personal details about your marriage." Alexander leaned forward, his eyes aflame. "Is that a threat?" "It's business," Elias said, with an indifferent shrug. "But I'll consider it a personal favor if you reinstate me into Horizon Global Ventures in a senior capacity. Give me a stake in one of your next big projects. Let me back in the game." Alexander stared at him, a swirl of disgust and pity roiling. "You'd stoop this low?" Elias raised his glass in a mock toast. "Come on. We both know what your father taught us. Success is about leverage. I have leverage now." Alexander stood. "I won't be blackmailed." Elias shrugged, unbothered. "Then you can watch me dismantle your carefully curated world piece by piece. I wonder how the press would react if they learned the real reason behind that carved name. Or if certain financial transactions were put into public record." Alexander's fists clenched, but he forced himself to walk away. Engaging in violence or an open confrontation here would only complicate matters further. As he left the bar, Elias's eyes burned into his back. Outside, the chilly air stung his cheeks, matching the fury that flared in him. Back at Horizon Global Ventures, Alexander convened a small circle of trusted advisors: Miriam Kelly, Charles Deering, and an old ally, Jessica Freeman, the firm's head of compliance. They pored over files detailing Elias's previous projects, searching for any vulnerabilities or potential wrongdoing that Alexander could use as a counter-leverage. An exasperated sigh slipped from Alexander as they found only minimal leads. Elias's misdeeds were well documented from the prior scandal, but he had skillfully wiped most records beyond that. The man was cunning, leaving little behind that could incriminate him now. Cassandra, too, joined the meetings for the first time since the miscarriage. She offered a fresh perspective, though her role was mostly supportive. Alexander felt a glimmer of their old partnership, the synergy that had once made them unstoppable. Late one evening, while scanning the older architectural plans for the Haven complex, Cassandra found a cryptic note scrawled in the margins. A note referencing a specialized vault in the sub-basement designed for data storage, one that Elias had insisted on implementing when he was still with the company. "This sub-basement vault," she said, pushing the plan toward Alexander. "Do you remember authorizing it?" He furrowed his brow, scanning the document. "Not specifically. Elias was heading security protocols back then. He might have snuck it into the design." Charles leaned in, adjusting his reading glasses. "I recall some mention of a state-of-the-art data center, but we never used it. The project was scrapped after Elias left. Cassandra tapped her pen on the blueprint. If Elias had free rein to design it, maybe he stored something there, some leverage." Miriam nodded. "He might be counting on no one remembering this vault exists. It's possible he's stashed files there that he can threaten to reveal." Alexander stood. "We're going down there. Under the cover of night, Alexander Cassandra. Miriam and Charles slipped into the Haven complex. They made their way to the sub-basement, guided by the dusty blueprint and the flicker of overhead fluorescent lights. Occasionally, a distant hum of machinery echoed through the concrete corridors. At the far end of a deserted hallway, they found the entrance to the vault, a nondescript metal door with an electronic keypad. Miriam produced a small hacking tool, courtesy of their IT department. She set to work, sweat beading on her forehead, until a faint click announced success. Inside, they discovered a chamber lined with racks meant for servers that never arrived. The air was musty thick with disuse. It took them a while to find anything unusual until Cassandra noticed a steel cabinet in a corner. It was locked, but with a traditional padlock instead of advanced electronics. Charles pried it open with a crowbar. Inside sat a single external hard drive labeled HGV Archives. Next to it lay a dusty stack of documents. Their hearts pounded in unison. Alexander carefully lifted the drive. This must be Elias's stash. He rummaged through the papers, spotting spreadsheets, old memos, and references to questionable deals. Some were legitimate business records, others had confidential stamped across them in thick red letters. The final sheet in the pile drew his eye a ledger listing large sums of money, moving between shell companies, including suspicious references to Adelphi Holdings, a name Alexander had never encountered. They exchanged wary glances, suspecting that Elias had compiled these documents to blackmail the Haven family or any business partners. The question was, who was the real target? Miriam frowned. He might have documented wrongdoing in the Haven Empire, possibly your father's older deals, maybe your father's or your grandfather's, or he might have forged some parts to create false accusations. Either way, it's a time bomb. Cassandra brushed her fingers over the ledger. Could it be tied to your father's secret expansions overseas? I always found it strange how hush-hush Gordon was about certain properties in Europe and Asia. Alexander looked grim. This is more extensive than I imagined. My father might have skeletons buried in places I never knew existed. Charles cleared his throat. We should get these files analyzed, sort out what's real. If some of these are legitimate records, your father could face legal trouble. A wave of fatigue washed over Alexander. Elias had set a trap. Possibly Gordon was complicit in questionable dealings. If so, exposing this could shatter the entire Haven Foundation. But burying the truth would only empower Elias's blackmail attempts. After carefully photographing the documents, they left the vault, locking it behind them. Each step up the sub-basement stairs felt heavier. Alexander's mind raced with potential scenarios, from criminal investigations to media firestorms. But overshadowing all of it was the name Adrian. How the memory of his unborn son had been twisted into the crowbar that pried open these hidden secrets. The next morning, Alexander summoned Gordon to his estate, producing the files and confronting him directly. In Cassandra's presence, the older man examined the documents without betraying much emotion. Then he looked up, eyes icy. Elias was always a snake, he said simply. And you've proven yourself naive for letting him collect these. Alexander's voice shook with outrage. Don't deflect. These deals, offshore shell companies, questionable partnerships. This is bigger than Elias. Did you sign off on all this? Gordon's jaw tightened. I did what had to be done to keep our family's fortune intact. Do you have any idea the lengths I went to ensure the Havens remained powerful? We live in a harsh world, Alexander. Sometimes that means forging alliances and sealing deals in ways that aren't publicly palatable. Cassandra's hand flew to her mouth. That's your justification for money laundering bribery. Whatever else is in those documents, Gordon slammed his fist on the table. Do not judge me. Everything I did was for the family. I built an empire for you, Alexander. And here you are, unraveling it all because some ungrateful friend decided to toss around petty threats. Alexander inhaled sharply. Petty threats. He carved Adrian's name on our building to torment us. Don't you understand what this means to Cassandra and me? Gordon's gaze flicked toward Cassandra, momentarily softening. I'm sorry about your child. Truly. But from a business standpoint, Alexander cut him off. Stop. You can't reduce everything to business. This is our family. A tension-soaked silence stretched. Eventually, Cassandra intervened. We need to decide what to do with Elias and with these files. If the media gets hold of this, your entire legacy is at risk. Gordon's lips thinned. Offer him what he wants within reason, and bury this. The Haven name must remain unscathed. Alexander bristled. No. I'm done paying for blackmail. We need to handle this differently. Then handle it, Gordon said, rising from his seat. But don't expect me to take the blame if you fail. He left in a swirl of expensive cologne and bitterness. Alexander clenched his jaw. Cassandra placed a tentative hand on his shoulder. We'll figure it out, she said. But even as she spoke, fear tinged her voice. Days passed, and the pressure mounted. Alexander and Cassandra moved through the estate like ghosts, each lost in a storm of thoughts. Cassandra tried to break the silence more than once, but Alexander was too consumed with forging a strategy to defeat Elias without letting the blackmail files go public. One evening, as a cold rain battered the windows, Cassandra found Alexander in the study, staring at old family photos. He fixated on one of them, a shot of him and Cassandra in front of the nursery, just after she announced she was pregnant, both beaming with unrestrained joy. It felt like a lifetime ago. She sat beside him, sliding an arm around his shoulders. For the first time in weeks, he leaned into her warmth, letting out a shaky breath. I keep trying to hold everything together, he whispered, voice hoarse. But maybe it's time to let it fall apart, so we can rebuild honestly. Cassandra hesitated, her fingers stroking his hair. What do you mean? I mean, maybe we come clean. Let the authorities see those documents, see if there's wrongdoing, and if it implicates my father, so be it. I can't keep living in this twisted circle of blackmail and secrets. A tear escaped Cassandra's eye. That's a huge risk, Alec. It could destroy the Haven name. He swallowed. Our child was destroyed by secrets, too. I never told you how I truly felt after we lost Adrian, how broken I was. I tried to bury it, and it only caused more pain. I don't want to bury anything anymore. Cassandra's tears flowed freely. She cupped his cheeks, searching his gaze. I've hated you for wiping out Adrian's name, for ignoring my grief. But part of me knew you were doing it out of your own heartbreak. I just couldn't face it. Maybe I needed to hate someone. Alexander held her close. I'm sorry. Truly. I wish I could redo it all, but this is our only chance to make something right. If I have to risk the Haven name for it, I will. They held each other for a long time in silence, the patter of rain mixing with the gentle hum of their quiet sobs. Bolstered by Cassandra's support, Alexander arranged a meeting with an attorney experienced in corporate wrongdoing and whistleblowing cases. Cassandra insisted on joining, placing her own name on the line if it meant forging a path toward honesty. The attorney, Janet Huang, listened intently as they recounted the story. Elias's blackmail, the suspicious documents, Gordon's potential involvement. Janet tapped her pen on a legal pad. Her brow furrowed. "You could absolutely go to the authorities with this," Janet said. "But the repercussions will be swift. If your father is named, the press will devour the scandal. Your business empire could face asset freezes, investor pullouts. Worst case, you might be forced out of Horizon altogether." Alexander nodded grimly. "We understand. But if we let Elias hold this over us, we'll never be free." Janet leaned forward, eyes intense. "There is another approach. We can compile the documents properly, highlight any legitimate wrongdoing, and strike a deal with the authorities, cooperate fully in exchange for leniency, especially if you personally had no knowledge or involvement. Then you use that official stance to face Elias. If he tries to leak anything else, it'll either be old news or overshadowed by your proactive cooperation." Cassandra looked at Alexander, and he squeezed her hand. "Let's do it," he said. A week later, everything unfolded in a maelstrom. Alexander handed over the stash of documents to federal investigators. Gordon, upon learning of his son's plan, erupted in fury, threatening to disown Alexander and disclaim him from the Haven fortune. In a heated exchange, Alexander retorted that no legacy was worth sacrificing integrity. The media storm was immediate. Headlines blared, "Haven Empire under investigation." Stock prices wobbled. Enemies came out of the woodwork, piling on claims and rumors. Some of the documents did implicate Gordon in shady overseas dealings, though the extent of criminal liability remained uncertain. Elias, furious that Alexander had circumvented his blackmail, attempted to leak additional documents, but they were dismissed as either already in possession of investigators or irrelevant. The worst damage fell on Gordon's personal reputation. Alexander stood poised to lose a sizable chunk of the family wealth, but ironically his public image remained relatively unscathed. In some corners, he was hailed as a man who chose the moral high ground. Cassandra stood by him, offering unwavering support through the barrage of cameras and microphones. In the midst of chaos, they found themselves drawing closer, forging a new intimacy shaped by shared adversity and honesty. Amid the swirling fallout, Alexander decided to rectify his greatest regret. While Cassandra was away at a charity event, he snuck into the old nursery. Since the day he painted over the walls, the room had remained cold, empty, and lifeless. He reopened the sealed cans of paint, carefully mixing soft blues and greys, the same palette they had originally chosen. Next, with trembling hands, he painted the name Adrian in delicate lettering on the wall above where the crib once stood. He added small embellishments, little stars, a crescent moon evoking the night sky they had once envisioned for their child's peaceful dreams. When Cassandra returned that evening, she found him in the nursery, paintbrush in hand, tears slipping down his cheeks. He gestured silently to the wall. She pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes filling with tears. She joined him, picking up a brush and adding her own finishing touches. They worked side by side, recreating what had been lost. Forging a small sanctuary, not for a living child, but for a memory that would always hold a corner of their hearts. Afterward, they slumped together on the floor, leaning against the freshly painted wall. For the first time, the name Adrian brought them solace instead of sorrow. Several months later, the investigations concluded. Gordon faced penalties, steep fines, partial relinquishment of overseas assets, and a forced retirement from the board of Horizon Global Ventures. Alexander took the reins fully, albeit under the scrutiny of new compliance measures. The company survived battered but intact. For many employees, Alexander's willingness to confront corruption ignited a renewed faith in Horizon's future. Elias vanished from Boston's high society rumors, swirling that he fled the country. With no leverage left, his name faded into the background. Few missed him. During a quiet afternoon, Alexander and Cassandra strolled hand in hand through the Haven Complex Plaza. They paused at the stone panel near the entrance where Adrian had once been etched. A faint outline of the letters was still visible even after professional repairs. Instead of resentment, Alexander felt a gentle pang of remembrance. Cassandra rested her head on his shoulder. It's strange how it all turned out. Adrian's name brought so much conflict, but in the end, it brought us back together. Alexander nodded softly, kissing her temple. It's not the way I would have chosen, but I guess fate finds odd ways to guide us. She smiled through lingering sadness. I've been thinking a lot about the future, about maybe trying for another child one day. The corners of Alexander's mouth lifted. I'd like that, he whispered. And he knew despite the scars they were stronger than before. That evening they returned to the estate. Outside the nursery, Cassandra paused, placing her palm on the fresh paint. They didn't need to erase Adrian's memory anymore. Love and acceptance had replaced denial and guilt. In time, they would fill that house with laughter, and maybe, just maybe, Adrian's name would become a whisper of hope rather than a cry of loss. And there you have it, a tale of ambition and heartbreak, where a single etched name tore through family secrets and forced a reckoning that no one saw coming. In the end, Alexander and Cassandra found the courage to face the ghosts that haunted them, to stand up against blackmail, and to carve a new path defined not by hidden deals or erased memories, but by honesty and love.